高潔で純真な魂。ようやくここに来たのね。ではもう一度自己紹介をするわ。火を追うが第2位、神河のエリシア。もう一つの肩書きはすでに分かってるのよね。けど本当の意味で第13律者の前に来たと。
Whoa, time out. This is a big f***ing deal.
Captain on bridge.
Hello everyone, my name is Obsidian and welcome to the first of many videos where I talk about Honkai Impact 3rd's lore. And today we're talking about something big, the 13th Herrscher. Now if you're new to the Honkai series as a whole, you might not really recognize how important this reveal really is. But let me try to give you some context. Even back to the days of Honkai Gakuen, or Gunskirl Z as it's called, we've known that there were supposed to be 14 Herrschers in total. But there's been a gap in our information. We've never once known what the 13th Herrscher is, what it does, who it was, nothing. Not even a remote, even slightest little chance of any information. Mihailo was apparently keeping this very close to the vest, or maybe they just forgot about it until very recently. But either way, now we have Alicia and direct confirmation that the 13th Herrscher exists, so I decided to do what I do best and read way too much into things. So let's see what we know. Elysia is the second Mantis soldier created and second in command of the Flame-Chasres. At the time of her surgery, she was the only Mantis that was ever created from a Viperlipa class Honkai beast, which is the undefined category and includes all beasts that don't really fit neatly within the currently existing categories.
でも本当に話すようなことはないのよ。末法とされているのはそこらの崩壊獣では定義できないからなの。
She was merged with Mahisvara, which I'm probably mispronouncing, and it shares its rank with only one other beast that we know of so far, Vishnu, and that was only after Cosma entered Metamorph Overload, or Active Honkai Reaction, and became a Honkai beast for a little while before he yeeted off to become Honkai Batman. You know, as you do.
ビシュヌのように一番弱い下位の崩壊獣から成長を続けて審判型を超えた存在に普通のランクをつけるなんてふさわしくないでしょ。これもメイが決めたのよ。しかも理論上の末法型崩壊獣は最後になっても3体しか現れなかった。とにかくそれのことは超レアで超すごい崩壊獣因子だと思っておけば大丈夫よ。ビシュヌでさえいろいろあった末にようやく末法型って認められたんだから。
Elysia is the only Mantis that was ever made with Mahisvara, and later attempts by Dr. Mobius failed and left the candidate horribly disfigured. Or maybe it turned them into a scrunkly little elf, but who's to say right now. But this raises some very serious questions. Why does Elysia show no signs of major physical change aside from her elf ears, and what are her Mantis powers exactly? Well, the game tells us a few possible things. Elysia does not seem to age or change in any way.
そう。いくら食べても太らないの。鍛錬しなくても体のラインが美しいの。不摂生な生活を送ってるのに、肌は日に日に綺麗になっていくし、ニキビもできないし、髪の毛だってふわふわよ。結果、美しいというものに実感を得られなくなった。それが私が支払った代価よ。
When she takes a significant amount of damage, she can surround herself with pink Honkai crystals and recover health. She can encase others in a crystal or cause trauma and absorb their life energies. She can concentrate and manipulate Honkai energy to form crystalline flowers, seeds, pollen, trees, etc. And like most Mantises, she has a drastic increase in strength. There's also some suggestions that she has other powers or changes, some of which might be a little bit more sinister.
その定義がどう決まったかは俺も知らない。しかしそれがもたらす増幅の話だったら、それぞれの特性に基づくと、それはより高いだろう。しかしその分、代価も高い。
But for now, that's what we kind of know directly. We do know that the Mantis surgery in general is the first step in becoming a Honkai beast, and that these changes have other issues. Like, for example, there is dialogue from Recollections that implies that Fupa is able to hear the will of Honkai after she became a Mantis, and that the desire to slip into Metamorph Overload is something that all Mantises have to resist.
そういえば、あの姿は融合戦士にとって実は手術後に現れる本能のようなものだとメビウスが話していたんですが、フワも 同じなんですか？今までそういう状況のあなたを見たことがなかったので。
私だけではなく、メビウス博士以外の融合戦士はみんなできる限りそういう本能を抑えていると思います。融合戦士の本質は崩壊の力を持って崩壊に対抗しているに過ぎません。ですから普通の人々より私たちは崩壊側に傾きやすいのです。長編手術を受けたその時から私たちは一歩目を踏み出しました。人類から崩壊獣へと変化する。
But what does all of that have to do with the 13th Herrscher? I think that it is important for us to establish what Alicia is capable of doing before she became a Herrscher for two main reasons. One, her powers as a mantis might actually be separate from the powers that she wields as a Herrscher. Or two, her powers have a direct influence over what type of Herrscher she would become. For the purposes of this video, I think the truth probably lies more to the second, but to know why, let's look over what we already know about the existing Herrschers. All Herrschers seem to exert some manner of control over the elements or fundamental principles. The Herrscher of Reason can manipulate logic and knowledge to manifest objects and machines to do its bidding. The Herrscher of the Void can create pocket dimensions and teleport. The Herrscher of Thunder can control lightning and plasma. The Herrscher of Wind conjures massive storms at will. The Herrscher of Ice can summon blizzards to freeze enemies. The Herrscher of Death can create a pestilence that absorbs life but is also able to create plants or life. The Herrscher of Fire calls down unparalleled firestorms. The Herrscher of Sentience lulls victims into dreams and manipulates a person's perceptions. The Herrscher of Earth and Stars controls gravity and has the ability to create a black hole to suck in and destroy opponents. The Herrscher of Domination can adjust energy channels to imaginary space, steal the powers of other Herrschers, and can duplicate itself to control the masses and Honkai beasts like puppets. The Herrscher of Binding has the power to nullify all Honkai energy within a range. The Herrscher of Corruption exists like a virus and can infect both humans and machines alike. Of course, we have the mysterious 13th Herrscher, for which we have no information currently. And we have the final Herrscher, the ultimate being more powerful than all the others, an ultimate invincible and omniscient god. So the question I raise to you is this: what's missing? Well, the answer, put simply, is another fundamental force: time. Now that might seem at first to be a shot in the dark. After all, there's no information confirming that in-game. So why would I claim that time is the force that it's able to control? Well, as I mentioned before, it's important to look at what's there, but also what isn't there. All Honkai beasts that we fight show us the basic aspects of these powers that the Herrschers control in some way or another, and time is no exception.
何これ。
Husk Nihilus, the default final boss in the Elysian Realm and a recurring boss in the game. Husk hurls its greatsword and generates a time-slow zone which can inflict imaginary taint when its energy is run out. It can summon a void shade to attack the player, and it freezes time flow of its body and continuously self-heals while attacking the player with a giant summoned clock. Now let's look at Alicia's abilities. She attacks and leaves behind a crystalline seed that can cause trauma that she uses to absorb your health. She creates a delay action crystalline flower. She can summon a crystal branch that attacks sporadically and later can be destroyed to create a crystal tree, which she uses to make the crystalline dome. And if she takes fatal damage, she creates a flawless crystal to revive herself and restore health. These may not seem particularly similar. I mean, Husk has a strong time theme and Alicia is more connected to plants, but look at it again. Both cause a status ailment that reduces health from the player in some way or another. Both summon entities that continually attack the player directly and passively buff themselves at the same time. And both encase themselves in something to recover their health. Now, admittedly, that's a somewhat surface level comparison that might just be a coincidence, but let's look at things from another angle. Why does Alicia have a plant-like motif to begin with? Sure, part of that reason is because she's an elf, but what if it's more than that? What if the reason that she has a plant-like theme with all of her attacks is because she has a direct connection to the other major plant-like structure in the Honkai multiverse, the imaginary tree? Taking that even further, what is the imaginary tree if not a collection of timelines and possible events? There's a case to be made that each of these abilities is a very unique, masterful control over Honkai energy and also over time. You could potentially view Elysia reversing time around herself to a point before the damage was taken, or that it never happened at all. She might be able to cause a trauma that absorbs your health by redirecting it to herself through time and energy. And all of her structures are just working to support that skill, which isn't really all that different from how Husk operates. And to top that all off, Husk is also a boss that emerges from imaginary space, giving it direct ties to the imaginary tree. But let's move away from my overanalysis of Alicia's moveset and refocus our attention instead to some story evidence. We know that Elysia is very closely tied to the Elysian Realm, which as a refresher is a collection of the histories and memories of the 13 Flame-Chasres.
ここに保存されてるのは13人の融合戦士の記憶だけだって言ったわね。
その通り。私たちは SO1129 という技術で作られた記憶体だわ。13人の記憶を借り、精神活動を通して心理的印象を作り、脳に浮かんだ画像を還元し、世界の輪郭と詳細を構築する。
This is a very direct establishing connection for Elysia to time and memory. Now while on the surface you could argue that this is also the same connection that all other Flame-Chasers would share, I think that Alicia's are a little bit more significant. The Elysian Realm was created and named on her proposal.
ちなみに、古の楽園という名前は私が提案したわ。発想は私自身のことね。
And later, Eponia would use her powers to remember Elysia in her entirety within the realm.
私はあの人のすべてを覚えることにした。神様からいただいたこの才能で。
But Obsidian, Eponia and Sue were instrumental in the creation of the Elysian Realm. They used their powers to add the memories and to forge the space. So why would that not also apply to them?
僕たちは共に楽園をこういった形で存在させた。だから僕は彼らよりも確信できるんだ。君も僕も何でもできるわけではないと。
Well, that's actually a really great point, random angry contrarian in my comments. But it's one that I think if you look on their roles, it actually backs up Elysia's connection to time even more. Both Eponia and Sue are psychic mantises.
スー、私たちの間にはやっぱりかすかな違いが存在する。
それは事実だよ。精神感知型として僕たちの資質には雲泥の差がある。
And they're able to predict the future. Eponia through observing the various threads of fate, and Sue by using the past to predict the future.
あなたも自身の予見の話を何度もしたけど、それを比較対象にしていいかしら。
僕の予見は過去にあった過程と当事者の性格に基づいたもの。一度あることは二度あるという言葉のように、僕にとってはその出来事の構成の一部が固定されたとき、すでに結末は決まっているんだ。しかしアポニアの所見は違う。彼女は他人への接触を通じて現実の上を見るという行為を可能にする。ただ彼女は人々を操る意図が見えるだけ。それだけだよ。
But neither of them seem to be able to affect Elysia with their psychic powers, and neither are able to really see Alicia's fate. Even Griseo is not able to peer into her inner world for some reason.
それは理にかなってるわ。それでエリシア、同じ呼び方はしなくていいのよね。
いいの。彼女のために描いた絵は空白しかないから。
どうして？それって彼女の心に影が一つも存在してないってこと？
わからない。彼女は自分の考えを隠さず全部見せてるからかもしれない。もしくは私が彼女の心に入れないからかもしれない。
And what's more, Eponia and Sue are not the only characters seemingly able to predict or see the future. One power that I intentionally neglected to mention earlier is that there's a recollection that implies that Alicia can see the immediate future, though to what extent we don't really know yet, other than that it's fundamentally different from Eponia's powers. And this, plus her role in interactions with Eponia and Sue, seem to show that Alicia might be able to affect time or memory in some way or another. However, I think that time may not really be the best term to describe what Alicia's powers actually are. Another way of interpreting this is that Elysia is in control of fate, and there is some lore evidence to back this up. Aponia, after the events of Elysia's betrayal, questions if Elysia was able to defy fate, and no one really has a good answer for her. There's an implication that Elysia changed something so that Aponia is no longer able to view the threads of fate like she could before.
最初から最後まで私は彼女の運命が見えなかった。だから何か転機があって彼女は私の知らないやり方で私のできないことを成し遂げたのだと思った。けどあなたも知っているように結末は変わらなかった。あの輝かしい文明も今となっては砂礫すら残せなかった。
You can also look at Alicia's role in history as someone who was present from the 2nd Herrscher onto the 13th, and present for almost every major event, as someone very closely tied to the fate of the era. Even Kevin says that had he known what her goals were earlier, the previous era might have had a drastically different fate.
あの時代が終わるかどうかは、僕が天下制裁を使うかどうかと必然的なつながりはないんだ。だが、君の本当の目的をもっと早く見抜けていたら、僕たちは違う結末を迎えられていたかもしれない。
So let's focus now on an aspect of Honkai lore I feel like isn't talked about very often, and that is the connection between the Flame-Chasres and Arthurian myth. The Honkai manga often makes reference to the myth of King Arthur, establishing that Sue was the Lady of the Lake who provided Arthur with Excalibur, and that Kevin is supposed to be Merlin. Arthur has ties to the second divine key, which he might have used in his journey to Avalon after the fight with Mordred. And we could leave these connections as they are. Sue has the second divine key, Kevin trains Arthur to help him fight Honkai, and Arthur would later use the second divine key to enter the Avalon Bubble universe, which he perceives as paradise. But in actual Arthurian legend, there is another important figure, one that aids Arthur in his journey to Avalon, Morgan Le Fay. And it's Morgan Le Fay that I want to focus on here. Depending on the literature or the mythos that you look at, Morgan, Morrigan, or Morgan Le Fay is often known as a war goddess associated with fate. In some cases, she's a hag whose actions would lead to the death of the hero, and in others, she's a seductress, even abducting people for her own ends. It doesn't really matter which version you look at, Morgan Le Fay acts in accordance to her own plans, and her power over others is often used even to the detriment of people around her. Morgan Le Fay is also very closely tied to the three fates in other legends. With this in mind, let's look back to Elysia. She's strong, in a position of power over others, and is integral to the history of the previous era. She jokes that it may be more appropriate to call her a goddess.
よく考えたら、私はあまり戦場に出ないから、せいぜい乙女ってところかしら。ねえ、どう思う？
Her character is very closely tied to love and a personality best described as flirty. And like we mentioned before, Kevin says that her secretive plans might have led to the downfall of the previous era.
メビウスは間違っていない。エリシアは確かに裏切り者だった。だけど、彼女は一度も人類と対立するような立場にはなっていない。最初から最後まで彼女が選んだ道は何も変わっていないんだ。彼女の目的も同じだ。僕たちが知り合う前から彼女は苦難の十字架を背負っていた。それなのに僕はその真相に最後まで気づけなかった。
If these traits seem familiar to you, then you would be on the same line of thinking that I am. It seems to me that miHoYo might have had Morgan Le Fay in mind when they were designing Elysia. And all of that speculation aside, Elysia also has other connections to broader European and Celtic mythologies, including her elf-like traits and the variety of possible Celtic knots in her outfit, one of which is the triquetra symbol, which coincidentally is associated with past, present, and future, and is also something that we see on the Herrscher of Domination puppets, which I needn't remind you, was a being from imaginary space with close ties to the imaginary tree. So what do we take from all of this? Well, I think we can say now that Elysia is very likely the Herrscher of Fate, and her powers have strong ties to the control of time, probably through some connections to the imaginary tree or to the multiverse that we've never seen demonstrated by any Honkai beast or Herrscher before. She may even have ties to her other multiverse selves. Sue does tell us that her decision doesn't change no matter what universe he looks at.
エリシア、君が探そうとした異なる結末の未来は最初から存在しないよ。時間の止まったここでも 終末に向かった現実でもどの葉の世界でも君は一度も自分の選択を変えたことがない。
ありがとうスー。私もそう思ってるわ。だって私は一途な人だもん。
Her powers from Mahisvara might have influenced these abilities, and might have made her aware of this outcome as early as the 7th Herrscher. And all of this conjecture seems to have a pretty strong basis in the lore and possible character design decisions around her. But what do you think? Was I able to convince you that Alicia is the Herrscher of Fate? Let me know down in the comments. And while you're down there, maybe consider dropping a like or a sub. This video took an absolutely crazy amount of time to research and put together, like weeks and weeks of research and grinding, so your support goes a long way in helping me make more videos like this in the future. But until then, I'll see you guys on the next one.